Hi, welcome back to the Butler's View. I'm Charles Butler. I have with me this evening Mr. Tom Sodeika, who's president of Precision Payroll of America, a small businessman who's been very successful and has a pulse on what's going on small business in America because of his clientele. Welcome, Mr. Sodeika. How are you?
I'm good, Charles. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming down. Tom, can you give us your feeling about the state of small business in America right now?
It's a battle. This really has been a very challenging time economically. It's been building for some time. We have about 1,800 clients that we service, and small business primarily. And what I have seen is that our clients' headcount, which is the number of people they have on payroll, has pretty much stayed the same since 2009, since we saw a large decrease. We saw a drop of approximately 17% across the small business arena in active headcount, as well as a pullback in total hours paid, a significant reduction in overtime. Little by little, we're seeing the time coming back. Some industries are seeing a little bit more overtime, but people are extremely cautious of making investments in their business and trying to expand.
Is that because of some of the federal policies people may perceive coming down the pipeline?
I think there is a lot of consternation, apprehension, and frankly fear, because there is a lot of uncertainty that's out there that impact taxes, that impact energy cost, that impact general overhead. What a lot of people don't realize about energy, for example, that it has a geometric or multiplication factor that impacts it. So when you take a product, and for example, we buy a lot of paper and toner, and the company that has to deliver that and that receives its raw goods, they're seeing an increase in fuel charges. That fuel charge is added to their fee, that is then added to the fee that brings that to us. And so we've seen an increase, significant increase, just in our current supply expenses. And that uncertainty makes it very difficult to say that, gosh, I feel very good. I can understand that my overhead or my expenses will be X plus 5% next year. We really don't know. The policies that are pending, I apologize.
It's okay.
The policies that are pending with Medicare, with the Healthcare Reform Act, with the EPA and EPA's moves to really try and tap down carbon could have a tremendous impact on electricity that could impact all of us, both businesses and consumers.
Okay. This 2% growth that we see in the market today, in the economy today, do you think it will be impacted positively or adversely if the president's reelected, for instance? Because I just see people saying that I'm going to hold tight. If the president's reelected, we don't know what's coming down the pipeline. I'm keeping my powder dry.
There is significant hesitation, I think, in the business community, the small business community. We feel a lot of folks in the small business community feel like they're not really, their issues and concerns, be it from a regulatory standpoint, from a tax standpoint, aren't really being addressed.
But the president has put on the face of all of a sudden being the friend of small business. Whenever he talked about the economy, he met with the executives of Fortune 500 companies. He didn't meet with any of the executives or small business people like Chamber of Commerce. They've still been like persona non grata at the White House.
Yeah, and it may be a challenge for us to get our voices heard, but I would imagine that our concerns are certainly individually on a much smaller scale than those of a larger company. But when you take into account that I think small business makes up about 97% of the U.S. economy, to have us impacted, we've already seen an impact, and I'll bring up energy again, just the cost of energy. We've already seen an impact in the cost to produce and deliver the same goods and services now is much higher. So many of us as consumers, as business owners, are basically running in place to stay even. So growth becomes very hard to do that when you think about somebody who makes $12 or $14 an hour, and their gasoline now goes up to $4.25 a gallon, down, up from $2.20 here in Chicago in a matter of a couple of years.
Tom, I want to ask you a couple of emotional button kind of topics. Illegal immigration. How is that impacting small business that you see, small business owners and working Americans?
You know, we have a very good, you want to call it a niche here in the Chicagoland area. We service about 100 or so landscapers, landscape firms, and there is some hiring that goes on there, but you know, and now you're kind of asking me to sort of take my head off as a business. You know, the problem with anybody that's undocumented or illegal is that it makes it very difficult to assign benefits, to report payroll, to report taxes, and it becomes it could become a distraction. I think about like Tyson Foods that had a large raid several years ago, where
in Iowa,
hundreds of employees were found illegal. And you know what? Shame on the employers for doing that. For looking to shave off 20 cents, 50 cents, $1 an hour.
Right.
Because
that's a great point. I've often pointed that out when people make the comments that illegals depress wages. Well, we're not talking about a lot here. We're talking 20, 30, 40 cents. We're not talking a guy who was making $14 an hour. All of a sudden, they're paying this guy 6 or 7.
Right. And the other thing too is that the other savings really comes into the overhead.
Right.
A lot of as I've participated in various seminars or spoken at different conferences, you and I have had this conversation once before about people who are going to receive unemployment benefits. They say, hey, I paid into this. Well, you really didn't. Indirectly. Indirectly, perhaps you did. Your employer actually did. There are a number of taxes and regulatory burdens and insurances and coverages that go on top of an employee's wage.
Well, mention those real quick for us.
Well, you have, for example, let's take, let's take a middle manager at a mid-sized company, maybe 500 employees or so. They're going to carry the unemployment tax burden both on the federal and state level, which incidentally the state of Illinois has really dialed up their rates this year. I have a small company. I've got 32 employees, and my tax bill for unemployment went up $19,000 in the first quarter.
Jeez.
Which came as a surprise because...
So that's almost $80,000 a year. You could employ a great employee for $80,000 a year to help you out.
Well, fortunately, the unemployment taxes do meet a threshold. Federal unemployment meets at $7,000, and the state of Illinois has gone up to now $13,300. But many employers in the state of Illinois now, because of the extended benefits, the dollars are owed, are being hit with these increases, and frankly are surprised, particularly if they had no claims. But as a whole, that pool is requiring those dollars. So there's a significant increase. In our particular case, 300% our rate went up. And basically it's there to backfill the losses incurred by the extended benefits, and certainly to shore up the funding to send it forth for additional benefits going forward. You have the Social Security and Medicare match. Many people will look on their checks and they'll see FICA or Social Security or MHI as the Medicare hospitalization. What they don't realize is the employer has to match that. So whatever is withheld from their check, double it. That's what's sent into the Social Security Administration.
Jeez.
And you have workers' compensation insurance, you have general liability insurance, you have benefits, which many companies try very hard to try and continue to provide benefits for their employees, but the cost of the benefits have just frankly increased outside of the normal scope of inflation.
It's interesting. So do you see the economy getting better, Tom? I guess that's one of the questions that the audience would like to know.
No, I'm sorry, I don't. First of all, we have a lot of uncertainty that is sitting out there. You may have heard about the fiscal cliff that is there when on January 1st, 2013, there is an expiration of what they call the Bush tax cuts. And now the Bush tax cuts, interestingly, is about, I think it's about $330 billion is what was estimated as what was held back for the workers,
Right.
or what they were able to keep. 70 billion of that is actually from the top wage earners, folks earning more than 250,000 as a couple, or 188,000 as individuals. The balance of that 250 billion or 260 billion is actually folks earning incomes from 20,000 on up.
Oh.
And so, but when you look at our deficits being 1.6 trillion, we're thinking maybe fortunately we'll be 1.4 trillion this year. If we were to return those taxes, that would still leave a deficit of $1 trillion.
You know, the interesting thing I find that about the president, President Obama, and his figures and his plans are that he really doesn't have one. You know, he talks a great game, but at the end of the day, he's had 3 years to do something, and nothing's been done. He can't. In reality, the president cannot get the Senate, which is controlled by Democrats, for those of you who don't know, and Majority Leader Harry Reid, to bring his appointments or his legislation to the floor. In fact, his budget was defeated 414 in the House to 0.
That was this year, and in the Senate last year, 97 to 0.
97 to 0. So, I mean, here's a president who can't get his own people to vote for his budget.
Yeah. And the real, I think to me, the saddest thing of it all is that I believe that we have approached a very serious economic condition where you might want to call it a tipping point. Sort of like that little bird that kind of keeps bobbing, and then he finally goes down. We're approaching that final downturn if we do not change the what I'll call the structural malfeasance and the structural failures that have been set up by primarily our politicians, the politicians of both houses, frankly, who seem
and both parties.
And both parties.
Yeah.
And they seem to run on self-interest rather than really focusing on, the Constitution is a beautiful document.
Well, it's outdated according to President Obama.
Well, it's, I'm sorry to hear that.
And Woodrow Wilson. Don't forget Woodrow Wilson.
I'm sorry to hear that. I think people who want to do more with control would most likely not appreciate the Constitution, because the Constitution really leaves the power in the people.
Well, that's where the power should be. So when I hear the president says, my house, no, it's the people's house, Mr. President. You're just there for 4 years or 8 years, but well, if Obama have, he may try to undo the Constitution and run for 3 terms, but.
Well, I don't know, but I just hope some sanity returns to the political rhetoric, because I think, again, we're at a point where we have folks that are struggling to find work. There's on the way down, I was listening to CNBC, I was listening to CNN, and it was interesting how the political talking heads were on there, and they were saying, Barack Obama. Created 4.2 million jobs. No president, I believe, can take full credit or any partial credit of jobs created in the private sector.
Correct.
Unless, of course, they've actually worked to create the environment and conditions that can reflect a significant bump in hiring that would have accelerated past maybe a projected growth or a trajectory that was already in place. If the economy is growing at 2% or employment is, say, 180,000 new jobs a month, and some policies are put in place, and you start seeing job growth of 330, 350, you could say, you know what? There is a connection here.
But there really isn't. I mean, the only time that the president really creates jobs is when he expands the government. and
Well,
expands government jobs.
My point was that I think within the first year
Mm-hmm.
there were some 200,000 hirings done at the federal
And
level.
Bush did the same thing when he created TSA and Homeland Security
yes,
and
absolutely.
that big apparatus. You know, those agents went to bed, Wagon Hut security guards, and woke up super TSA agents. You know, woo.
And you know, the amazing thing is that here we sit in Chicago with, you know, seeing our property values decline,
Yes.
seeing our property taxes
Increase.
where Washington D.C. was about the only market that has maintained at or above slight growth in the asset or the appreciation of the homes. Why? Because there's a big market there. When you add 200,000 people to the economy, it's going to make a big difference.
Tom, we have about a minute left.
You're
What would you
kidding.
like to
that
share?
was the fastest
Yeah, it was.
15 or 20 minutes.
What would you like to share with our audience that we haven't discussed during this segment?
You know, I would say that really take a hard look at the criticisms that are coming about business. We have a NATO summit coming here to Chicago this week, and there seems to be a heck of a lot of adulation and attention paid to the folks that have been part of this Occupy Wall Street group. And you know, there are many of us, if you work at a store, if you work at, you know, you're all part of the business, you're all part of the economy. We're all trying to work to contribute,
yes.
you know, and really come down from the political pollution that I call it, and really think about the issues. And really think about who is it that's going to keep us, get us on a path, you know, of strong principles.
Strong principles. Well, the president just declared gay marriage was a thing that we need to support.
Well,
I'll
that'll
deal
be
with
a
it
chat
if
for another day.
But Tom, you know, I want to thank you again for taking the time to spend with us this evening and give us your take on small business, because you're right there with all types of small businesses all over the country.
Yeah, and please understand it is anecdotal. It's just from my experience. I'm not running major surveys or anything like that, but it's just what I see on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that's what drives the country. That's what's always driven the country, not studies, not popularity polls, but people like you, hardworking Americans who are providing jobs and educations for people's children. Thank you again, Tom, for being such a great American. We'll be right back for some comments and closings with the Butler's Views. Charles Butler. Ball of confusion, that's what the world is today. Hey, hey. Those of you who were around during the 60s know what that song is, Ball of Confusion by the Temptations. I was living in Detroit at the time, Detroit area, with my parents and my brothers. And I can tell you, I could certainly identify with the Ball of Confusion. People were talking out against America. Dr. King had just been killed. What was the right way to go? Well, we certainly know it wasn't to grow an afro and wear a dashiki. When I went to Africa, I found that most Africans were laughing at us and the way we were portraying ourselves as African Americans. They said, "You are Black Americans." Barack Obama is an African American. We are Black Americans, and I'm very proud, I might add, to be a Black American. I'm not a descendant of an immigrant. I'm a descendant of a slave. Slaves who were very proud, who worked hard in the state of Florida to gain property, to gain education, to care for their families. And it's the reason why, when my father moved to Detroit after being a World War II vet, I could go on to live in a new home, never lived in a ghetto, attend the University of Michigan, attain my wildest dreams of being a naval officer, aviator, businessman, traveled all over the world. And I can say this to you. Anyone can do those things. All of us can do those things. It's about what's in you and what your goals and values are. Which brings me to the point of gay marriage. I refuse to allow a politician to define my morals and values. As the great Reverend Wright said, Barack Obama will be a politician all his life. But come January 21st, I'll still be a pastor. We should remember those things. We should remember our values. I don't have anything against what people do in the privacy of their own homes. That's their business. But marriage is between a man and a woman. And anything else is nothing but a mockery. Civil unions, I support them entirely. However, the same protections can be afforded a couple without entering into a civil union, for those of you who don't know. But those are the stories that have been perpetrated out there. Black unemployment. Many of you don't know this, but I'm going to share this with you, and you can look it up later. The March on Washington in 1963. Some civil rights leaders, especially those who are around today, would have you believe that it was about civil rights. Folks, it was about jobs. Civil rights was a side issue. That's why you had George Meany. You had A. Philip Randolph. You had Walter Reuther out front. It was about employing black men at the time. Women weren't really in the workplace at that particular time in '63. They were housewives. Black unemployment was 6%, which was unheard of and unconscionable. Today, we take 12% unemployment, 10% unemployment, double-digit unemployment as just par for the course. However, in the black community and black communities across this country, black male unemployment is over 50%. Black men with a college education are 80 times likely not to have a job as their white counterparts with the same education and experience. The question has to be asked at some time, why? I'm not interested about having or consumed or excited about having a black man in the White House, because the only thing really black about President Obama is the color of his skin, his wife, and his 2 daughters. Other than that, he'll tell you he didn't have any experience being an African American. I would say this to you people: vet the president, vet his history, vet his track record. Those of us here in Chicago, we know President Obama. We know that he couldn't beat Bobby Rush. He lost to Bobby Rush by 60 points. And he would never beat Jack Ryan for the U.S. Senate if they hadn't opened his records. Jack Ryan's divorce papers in California, his sealed divorce papers at that. We have today, folks, black legislators on every level who are talking about a black-brown coalition. There is no black-brown coalition. When we talk about illegal immigration, these people are illegal. Here in Chicago, they said they won 3 wards based on population. Well, the interesting point was, or is, those people that they counted weren't citizens and could not vote and participate in our system. But the Latinos in Chicago are so brazen that they refuse to bus their children out of their community. Now, these are people who are here illegally. So you know what the people in Springfield did, and the black folks allowed this? They built 6 charter schools for them. And a guy who has the program, who has this group called UNO, is a man named Juan Rangel, who's an out-and-out racist, has made all types of racist remarks about black people, and no one, alderman, state rep, state senator, congressman, or senator has said anything about it. People, these are your tax dollars and should be spent in your communities, bettering your schools. Take a point from these illegal immigrants. Don't allow your children to be bussed out of their communities. And also demand, and I mean demand, that your neighborhoods be safe. There's no reason why in 2009, over 499 children were wounded. 399 children wounded, 148 killed going to and from school. That's unconscionable. Where is Michelle Obama on that when she's talking about obesity? Now, these things are going on in Kenwood and Hyde Park, right in the Obama's backyard, even before they left. So people, don't be snookered by this thing we call Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. Because as Whitney Young said, a person's liberalism seems to be related to the distance they are from the problem. When we meet again, I want you to do a little research and think about how Black Americans performed and excelled in the sciences, in the arts, in government, before we became African Americans. Thank you again for joining us. We'll be back with some interesting guests and an interesting view. The Butler's View with Charles Butler.